I truly believe that the people who get the most benefit out of our program are the ones who are willing to look in the mirror. And sometimes that mirror, when they first enter the program, is really fogged, and they don't even know it. And they've got a view of themselves that is far from the reality of the view that others have. And we push one another to challenge their assumptions about themselves and about the world around them. And we push one another, the cohort, to speak to one another about how they view how their actions and their behavior is kind of seen. And they learn to lead in a different way if they're willing to look in that mirror and say, maybe as one of our professors in the program, Rob Rhodes, used to say, don't be a jerk, right?
Welcome to Winning Strategies Playbook, the podcast where we welcome business leaders, CEOs, and industry experts to discuss the rise to the top, building wealth, and real estate insights. Here's your host, Jeremy Spann.
Welcome to Winning Strategies Playbook. For more information on this podcast, you can go to myexperiencedrealtor.com. That's experience with an ED at the end of it, myexperiencedrealtor.com. You can move over to the button that says podcast. Click on that. You can learn more about the show, the different podcasts. You can download it on Spotify, Amazon. There's all the different platforms, YouTube, if you want to watch my pretty face on YouTube. And of course, if you're looking to buy or sell real estate anywhere on the planet, need some guidance, you can always click on the Find a Trusted Professional on the homepage. But when you click on that podcast section, you can get to learn and read more about my fabulous guests. Suzanne Carter, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. Good to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come out here and share some wisdom to the listening and viewing world. But before we do any of these, my father-in-law says I got to do a joke. And so since he's mandated this, when I decided to start this show, I purposely do bad jokes. So if you don't laugh, then that's okay. And if you do, you have a really good sense of humor. So I figured with the remote learning recent things in the last year and a half, I thought this joke would be a little funny. Why were the teachers cross-eyed during their remote class session?
I don't know, Jeremy.
They couldn't control their pupils.
I have to say that's pretty good because I appreciate that one.
Right. So, and we're going to come back and dive into this to for the audience out there that does not know this is I did my MBA at TCU's Executive MBA program where Suzanne and I met. She is the Executive Director of the program when I went through. Started in 2013, finished in 2014. And anyhow, there's I'm sure been a lot of things in the past 18 months that have been really interesting to deal with from that perspective.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Just like the rest of the world, we had to adapt, and it was a question of what was important to us and what could we do to most effectively continue to teach. And one of the things was, I kind of felt like we were in a theater where they say no matter what happens, it's important to keep going. And so, we were the first program at TCU to continue. Once we went into lockdown, we just started right up into our regular system, but we were online only. And our faculty just jumped right on board. They were the first ones at TCU to do so. And the students learned to adapt to that different way of teaching. And And then as soon as we had the opportunity to get back in the classroom, we did so. Of course, social distanced, wearing masks, and what we would call a hybrid format, where some of the students who were comfortable being in the room and the faculty, they would be together, and we had others that were remote. And we, to this day, have students that are remote, but we also have the classroom intimate experience that we really, really know is a big part of our culture and makes us who we are.
So one of the goals or mission statement of the TCU's Executive MBA is building strategic leaders, right? And strategy, is not something that's just always long played, right? You got to roll with the punches and figure out what we do in situations like when a global pandemic hits us, right? And one of the unique things that I found that I really enjoyed about the Executive MBA at TCU was the professors weren't just career academia, right? And these are professors with multiple layers of education, but also multiple years of experience out in the business world.
Yes. Having the opportunity to take that experience and the context in which they worked, and then also kind of marrying it with the theoretical frameworks that we use, I think that has always provided a very rich environment for learning, and our faculty understand the importance of that. And, continue even in their academic world, they continue to do consulting, and some have their own businesses as they go through, as they continue down the academic path. And I think that really shows with the students. One of the important things in our classroom with executives as part of the cohort is that everyone is learning from one another. And so you have to have the faculty that understand the practical nature of business and the importance of really thinking through all of the avenues, and having all of the multiple perspectives in the room make a big difference to the learning objective in the classroom. One of the things that our faculty do is they make assignments that are real world based. So it's not a theory. It's a personalized approach to really getting the most out of the coursework. So you can have a particular class that actually has, like for instance, in our data analytics class, where you can use your own financial statement data from the company that you work for, that data, and use those data sets to analyze, say, entering into a new market or a competitive analysis, as opposed to just doing strictly case-based work.
Or like as Mo made sure we did, was a lot about pizza.
Yes. I think pizza came up a lot in your class.
So for the audience, I've had a restaurant over in Arlington for the last 10 years called Old School Pizza Tavern. If you're ever in the area, you definitely need to go visit. But we used the financials out of that because actually one of the interesting things that I learned when I came into the program is, so the program is every other weekend, Friday, Saturday, 8 to 5, where 8 to noon is one class, you go to lunch, and then 1 to 5 is the next class, and you do that Saturday and Sunday for 8 class segments.
Or Friday, Saturday.
Or is it 4? 8 class segments, but over a period of 4 separate weekends, right?
Yes.
Do I remember that correctly? And then, but one of my first ones was accounting with Dr. Short.
Yes.
And I remember in the very first class weekend, at that point I'd had my restaurant for two years, I think. And as we're sitting there, I was listening in class thinking, this doesn't sound like what my guy's doing. And then later went and dove in and quickly found out that person was not doing what they were supposed to. And I got rid of them as quickly as possible. And so talk about literally, as TCU likes to say, is classroom on Friday, Saturday, ROI on Monday. Well, that ROI that return on investment came in because it ultimately saved me, I don't even know how much money.
Yes.
So, I mean, that was a real world, just, wow, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right. And as many of our students are, of course, at kind of their mid-career point. So average age of the executive MBA students is around 39, but we have quite a range. Some can be, occasionally we get that rising star that's in their late 20s. That's just really doing phenomenal, either in their own business or in a larger company. But then we can have people as old as 65 or even older, and we have had. And so they bring this really diverse perspective in the classroom. But one of the really nice things, to your point, that you get this ROI is the recognition by the students that they learn to ask the right questions of the people who are doing their work, their functional expertise work. So in this case, this was an accountant who was doing work for you. People that run businesses sometimes, they rely on others. But unless you know at least the fundamental aspects of things, you don't know whether or not things are being run the way they should be. And that's really the push that our faculty give is what do you need to know about this? So you have to, as you have to go in the finance class, for instance, you have to go deep into the formulas to really understand where things come from. But the faculty also say, why does this matter? And what questions would you ask to make sure that that things are running the way they should be? And I've seen so many occasions over the years of working in this program. I've talked to alums or to students who have said, I looked and asked this question and realized even things, some things as minute as the accountant had an Excel spreadsheet that had a wrong formula in it and had been not inadvertently using an incorrect formula for multiple clients over multiple years. And because the student knew to ask the question, they were able to resolve that issue. So huge things like that you would never imagine going in.
Yeah, and that is just the essence of what I got. So when I did my undergrad at TCU is where I learned how to learn. And when I went back and did my MBA with you, I learned how to ask the right questions. I didn't have to know the answers. I just had to learn to ask the right questions, which is, with my background, I would say I've got a pretty unique career trajectory, right? So from dropping out of high school, going into the Marines, then getting out and joining Fort Worth PD for a number of years, getting my undergrad while working in patrol, then fast forward, promoting through the ranks, needed to get a graduate degree, end up back at TCU, doing the executive MBA, and then leaving the PD early, doing an early retirement to go work for a unnamed company where actually the reason that relationship ended was because I was asking the right questions, but I wasn't getting any answers. Not that I was getting wrong answers. We weren't getting any answers. Mm-hmm. And I had signed on to be a part of a culture where they had promised that I could ask questions and get answers, and there was all this transparency. And ultimately, that was a very painful financial situation that it caused me. But then it really gave a lot of strength and power to, what is the right question? So when I started the Spann Group, and it grew by going, what are the right questions, mm-hmm. right? How do I create value? What are the clients looking for? What is important to the client? What is not important to the client? How do I manage my pipeline? What is in my pipeline? And just so forth and so forth, to where it also taught me how to start asking uncomfortable questions, yes. right? Because everybody wants to ask the, good stuff, but you have to dive into where are the blind spots mm-hmm. in this? And actually with the program, that's another key component you learn out of there is learning what your both good and bad blind spots are, right?
Yes. I truly believe that the people who get the most benefit out of our program are the ones who are willing to look in the mirror. And sometimes that mirror, when they first enter the program, is really fogged, and they don't even know it. And they've got a view of themselves that is far from the reality of the view that others have. And we push one another to challenge their assumptions about themselves and about the world around them. And we push one another, the cohort, to speak to one another about how they view how their actions and their behavior is kind of seen, and they learn to lead in a different way if they're willing to look in that mirror and say, maybe as one of our professors in the program, Rob Rhodes, used to say, don't be a jerk, right? And if you are in a room with 30 other people and you know that there's got to be a jerk in the room somewhere, but you haven't named them yet, then probably that jerk is you, right? So just really, looking in the mirror and saying what do I want to do and how do I want to improve myself? And I've seen so many people get so much out of the experience when they do that.
Oh, and I think I was definitely a shell that peeled lots of layers off to learn a lot of things about myself in the program that were not exactly things that, one, I didn't realize some of them, and then other ones I just wanted to ignore. But if you're going to get out of something what you put into it is you really have to lean into the process, right? Mm-hmm. And doing it, it really positioned me that when I made a decision to leave the department and go to this other company that ended very poorly, I just leaned heavier into what I learned out of the program, right? And what was really interesting is I think being in the PD, I learned the concepts, but I didn't really have anywhere to deploy those concepts inside the PD, where then when I was trying to deploy them, but during that company I had gone to after the PD, but not allowed to demonstrate them, that when I finally got to just say, you know what, I'm just going to do my own thing because, you know what, nobody else is listening to me. And I know that I really want to put this stuff to work, and then doing it and scaling at a rapid rate. And it leads me to, it can also help you establish so much trust with people when you're asking the right questions. Mm-hmm. So right now I'm working on a significantly large deal, as you and I talked about a few minutes ago before we started this, and which this deal may or may not happen. Nothing's done till the ink is dry. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I've done through it is to go, here are the questions that I'm asking for this particular deal that I don't have the answers to. And these are things that could go wrong. And here are some questions that I'm asking of what could trigger these things to go wrong, right? And then basically the person that's representing the money coming in gave them a lot of comfort because they were like, man, you're not just telling me the good news. You're showing me where some of these things I didn't even realize, right? So, for example, their analysts were analyzing the financials on this deal, and they sent it back, and it's a large property acquisition. Should it happen? And I looked at it and I said, no. I said, man, your analysts are wrong. You're accounting for what the property tax is on this thing because the sellers own this for many years. But the second the transaction happens on this, it's going to get reassessed by the appraisal district. Your tax number is actually going to be $200,000 more than that. And so even, people think just because I'm in sales, I'm just trying to sell somebody. I'm like, no, I want you to have the confidence and comfort in the decision that you're going to make, especially when you're going to be writing a check as large as this one. I mean, it's a very, very large check. and so, but learning how to how to ask those questions is what I do. As a matter of fact, on my strategy board, right?
Yes.
The other strategy is
Love
I've got
that.
walls that have this special dry erase paint so I can just write on the walls. And that's what I'll do is I'll start with an opportunity And then underneath it, I'll just start writing questions. Writing questions, and in that question, trying to create another question that just gets to a point I can look at it and go, whoa, there's a lot of unanswered questions here. Or at the end of it, it's like, wow, we have a lot of answers to these questions and it looks really good, or it doesn't look so good. So that was a great value that I got learning out of the classroom at TCU. But like everybody that has great journeys, your journey had to begin somewhere. Where are you originally from? And talk to us about where you came from, where you grew up, and then how you got to where you're at now, being the executive director of TCU's Executive MBA.
Well, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and my memory of that is actually when I was young, probably preschool, kindergarten. My father went through one of the very first executive MBA programs that was around. It was an MBA program that there at Washington University of St. Louis. I remember him in his graduation gown and holding his hand as I'm walking through the gardens there. A fantastic memory. He ended up taking a general plant manager role at U.S. Steel chemical plant in Alabama, northern Alabama. So we moved there, and that's where I spent through high school. Then I went to school, actually, where my father went to school at the University of Illinois in Champaign, got a degree in accounting, became a CPA. And that was one of those things where, I started down the path as an undergrad, didn't really know what I wanted to do, knew they had a great accounting school, and just said, well, I'll learn what is in front of me, and became an accountant and started my career actually in Houston and for a company, Browning Ferris Industries. Well, Browning Ferris Industries is a waste management company. And so, I joke that I worked for a garbage company, which is true, but it gave me the opportunity to audit garbage all around the world. So that was kind of my first exposure to working in a global environment. I got a lot out of it. We did internal audit efficiency audits. And so that's where I first learned that I was interested in more of a big picture thinking. I was interested in understanding why in organizations, companies tended to work in silos. So there'd be the sales team, and then there would be the operations team, and I got to work with both, and I would get to, actually ride on the trucks and see that the drivers cared about their customers, and they cared that they weren't being overcharged, and they would tell me things like, we charge these customers twice a week, but really they only need once a week service. And so then, we'd go back and talk to sales about that, and they would adjust their service as a result of that, or their sales contracts. But I was just really surprised that there was no conversation amongst them. And that's when I really, that's one of the reasons why I decided to go back to school and get my MBA at the time. Was I said I want to understand the bigger picture and understand why these misses would happen. So I went to the University of Texas in Austin, and while I was in the MBA program, decided that a PhD was in order, because I had forgotten just how much I had loved school. And it took all of about, a month into my MBA program to say, why did I ever leave to begin with? Besides the fact that I needed to pay the bills, right? So the decision to make to get a PhD was, I think in part because I had been working with someone at BFI who told me when I was going back to get my MBA, he said, Suzanne, you'd make a great teacher. And I thought, that's a thought that's never occurred to me. It's never been on my radar. And so I, asked him more about that. Well, why do you think so? And the conversation that we had just always stuck with me. And so getting that PhD and then having the opportunity, and the PhD was in strategic management, which is a much broader kind of view of business. It's how do you manage an entire business successfully, and how do all those component pieces work together to give your business the most best odds of being successful in the long run. That to me was really the missing piece that I had from having the narrow vision that I had as an accountant to getting this broad perspective. So from there, my first job after I graduated was at the University of Notre Dame. I taught there for several years. While I was there, 5+ years. While I was there, managed to have 3 kids within the span of 2 years, and decided to actually take a break from teaching for a while and raise them.
You literally ran a supply chain system to have 3 kids in 2 years.
It was an amazing thing. It was quite efficient, I have to admit. I'm glad I had the 2 kids first, had twins first, because that made the one way easier when she came along. But 3 girls, very proud of them. Just recently became an empty nester, and actually all 3 girls are at TCU right now. But so once, during that time when they were still young, we actually chose to move back to Texas, and we moved back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And when my youngest started first grade, I said, I'm ready to get back into that educational world, and that's when I started at TCU. And I've taught in the Executive MBA program since then, so it's been about 12 years in the program. I've had the privilege of seeing hundreds of students graduate from the program. But I've taught strategy at TCU. That's my, primary hat, I think, is a professor of strategy. So I've taught strategy at the executive MBA level. I've taught workshops with the full-time MBA students, and I've also taught the undergrads. And right now I currently teach the fellows program undergrad strategy, which is the kind of the high academically oriented students, the most academically oriented students at the Neeley School. And so they're a lot of fun to teach. I teach them as seniors.
So I want to go back to something you had missed or mentioned, which was the silo, right? I wrote down a note here as, silo misses,
Yes.
right? Which can be costly or even potentially losing a client. Is how often do you think these silo misses occur in business?
More often than anyone cares to admit.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because people, they struggle with what we talk about in class is this approach of zooming in and zooming out. So many times if you're in a department, you have functional expertise, accounting, finance, marketing, operations, R&D, and you're tasked with doing a particular job. And that job becomes your tunnel vision. And so you want to get that job done as well as possible. And kudos to the people who can do that. But if someone in another department takes a different direction, let's say that the marketing people decide that, hey, we can market this to a different group, and no one says anything to the R&D group, then they're not going to get the right bells and whistles added to that particular product that's going to be effective with that group. And so unless there's communication, that's really going to be a miss. And that's where those silos really struggle. And communication is, as it's costly because it takes time. So people try to avoid it if they can. But lack of communication is even more costly. So we spend a lot of time in our strategy class talking about how you need to set up these lines of communication and also informal ways for people to communicate effectively so that that siloed thinking doesn't occur.
Yeah, and I love how that leads right into communication, which was probably one of the most essential skill sets that I realized I lacked in heavily. And going back to Rob Rhodes, rest his soul, unfortunately passed away of COVID last summer, but was a dynamic professor, right? It was COVID, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, when you start the program, you do in residence for a couple of days. They bring you all together, stick you in a hotel room, and you're going to learn how much you're going to love and not love each other real quick. And I remember when Rob said, your reputation starts today, right? And it's the one thing you're actually in control of.
Yes.
Right? And how you interact with others. And, I'm a very high A extroverted, just powerhouse at times, where I had to learn to really curb a lot of what I wanted to be vocal about, not because I didn't think it was valuable, it was because it wasn't fair to other members in the program if I was doing all the talking and they didn't have a chance. And really what I learned is, I feel like we had one of the most incredible classes that ever came through the program. And I'm not just saying that, because it was the one I was in. It was because we really had an interesting collection of different industries, different folks. I mean, it was just is probably about as diverse could get. And I just remember sitting there and listening and learning and go, wow. So this is what happens when you stop talking.
Yes, the diversity is so critical. The approach that we take is we can learn more from one another than we can from a professor lecturing in front of us. We can all get that content. You can do that in an online environment where you're just getting content. You can do that, in a study room by yourself where you're just getting content. But the richness and the variety of how you can apply that content and how you can learn different angles of that content comes from getting a group of people together like that. And I had an alum actually talk to me about the program after the program, and his comment was, Suzanne, the EMBA program cohort is like a slice of life. The people in there are what we see in the real world, and that cohort, if you develop a trust in one another, then you can share and have these uncomfortable conversations that you talked about earlier with one another and make everybody better as a result of it. And that's what I love so much. So yes, you learn that one of the best ways to learn is to listen. And it's not about, making sure that everybody knows you're the smartest person in the room on a particular topic. It's let's make everyone the smartest person in the room on all of these topics. And many times the best way we do that, is by listening, or many of the introverts in the class, what they bring to a classroom is the ability to synthesize. So they'll sit back and listen, and then they'll say, this is what I heard. And those can be light bulb moments for other people. So just understanding the complementary nature of people that are put on this planet and knowing it's all about asking the right questions, to your point. When I need to learn to ask better questions because I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, and one of the one of the interesting things that I found in the program was, so you have the academia part of it, then you have the classroom interaction part of it, and then you have the teams.
Yes.
Right. And so for me personally, right. So my first team, I did what I had normally done, which is, just be Spann. And at the end of that segment of the team being together for the first third of the program, and we do reviews on each other, some pretty colorful things came to fruition where I was like, I couldn't argue with it. I was like, yeah, I was trying to manipulate the situation on that or whichever. So it caused me to go into my second team of saying, hey, this is what I got dinged on in my last team. And I need you guys. But the only frustrating thing I had was my first team waited to tell me in an evaluation, never told me during it, right?
Yes.
So I made it a point when I went into my second team to go, hey, these are some things that were identified, but do me a favor. Don't wait. If you see something with me, don't wait till the end of this thing. Be vocal.
Yes.
And, of course, careful what you wish for, because my team, and they were very vocal. But it was great, and then it prepared me for, the third team I was a part of is, I don't think anybody would disagree, but me and Christy were probably the more strong personalities of the class, and so I did laugh when y'all put us on the same team. I thought this is going to be really interesting, but being that what I experienced in the first two teams allowed Christy and I to work very close together. We built this incredible relationship, and I had I gone and been on a team with Christy in the beginning, I think it would have been just a pretty huge failure. But because of what I learned from team one, team two, I was able to work with another very strong personality, and we were able to move the needle and get a lot of things done, which was incredibly just helpful for me moving forward after that, right? Was to learn how to navigate major challenges that might not be a, hey, equals MC squared got divided by the square root of .com. It's a, this person's got a personality and I got a personality, but we need to accomplish this together. How do we learn to communicate with one another in order to be able to do that? So that was a very strong point for me to learn that has allowed me to demonstrate for the last 7 years since I've been out of the program to get to where I've come. So that was a good, valuable lesson. And on top of that is I want to ask you about, as folks come through the program, right? Some come through, and naturally you're going to have some people just come because they want to get a piece of paper, right? They want to check that box to get to the next level. Then you have some that come because they want to ascend in their organization. And then you have some, like myself, that come in and had no idea that before it was all over, I wasn't just going to change jobs, change careers, but make a complete change in industry to something that I knew nothing about. And I've been, I've had my ups and downs in the beginning of that, but been able to create a very successful path. How often do you see that in the program?
It is interesting to me. We have we've recognized over the last, say, 5 years that we have a very different student body that's represented in our EMBA program than we did prior to that. So just historically speaking, EMBA programs were originally developed for companies to put their employees through a program. And so most of the individuals were, and our students were, sponsored by their companies in full. That model changed drastically after the economic recession, and now you have only about 25% of the cohort who is sponsored by their company, and the remainder pay their own way. And so they care a great deal about, of course, they care a great deal about what they're getting from the program because they're footing the bill. And that being said, the whole experience of what you get out of the program. So we now recognize that there are these diverse groups of people in the room that have different reasons for being there. So some, and to your point, Jeremy, some become what we would call pivoters in the program. I remember there was a student who was working in a Fortune 100 company, very successful, just wanted to make it up, the next couple of levels. And he took the entrepreneurship class. And in that entrepreneurship class, you do an assessment. And he discovered he was way more entrepreneurial than he thought. And that's when the seeds of what I might call discontent occurred, where he said, wait, maybe this role that I have at this company is not what I ultimately want. And he ended up ultimately starting his own business. And so that pivot came for him, similar to you, completely unexpected. And that's because many people are transformed through our program. They realize they have gone down a path that is what might have been the easy path for them, that didn't require any thought or any consideration for change. And they realize they've gotten to a place that they don't ultimately want to be. And so they look in the mirror and they reflect on what their strengths are, and they reflect on making uncomfortable decisions, and they do end up pivoting. So we have a number of pivoters, and I'd say there's probably a good 20% of the students that go through our program who end up changing directions unexpectedly. I actually think, if I'm not mistaken, there were 7 people in our previous class who decided to go into business for themselves during their time in the program. So it's a very entrepreneurial environment. But we also focus on entrepreneurship and innovation for people who are working in larger companies and how they can get that entrepreneurial spirit kind of embedded in their own organizations. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you started this conversation talking about teams, and I think that's an important thing to kind of consider. We are very deliberate in how we build our teams and how we put the teams together for you all to go through. And this is not something that MBA, to be certified and credentialed to get an MBA, that you have to go through this team experience. We put you in 3 different teams. And again, you could go through an online program and never be put in a team, or you could go through another program and they may suggest you work in teams and study teams. But this deliberate experience that we put our students through, and in some cases you're like, wow, why are we being put through this? We are never going to let an opportunity for education go to waste. And as if we're developing agile leaders, agile strategic leaders, we want the leaders to be able to learn how to be most agile. And working in different teams with different personalities is part of being effective in business. And asking our students to give that peer feedback, to evaluate one another, is the best way to do that. So I think, those kind of issues combined, how to learn from one another, and how to learn in you get put in another environment and with another set of people, and how to learn to have that team perform at its highest level. Those are exceptional tools that many people that, even that join our program don't really anticipate they're going to get that benefit out of it. So those are 2 different topics. So we talked about the pivoter approach and kind of reflecting on yourself, but also the reflecting back, and that is seeing how others in the cohort are leading and helping one another to get to where they really should and are best served, where they best belong.
Yeah, and knowing the value of what someone gets out of going through successfully the TCU's Executive MBA program is what gave me a large amount of confidence to recently bring someone onto my team that is a recent graduate, James Peterson.
Yes, I was thrilled to hear that.
Yeah,
Jeremy.
I was. So for the audience, and James will do it. He's been on here before with Cowtown Warriors, fellow Marine, but we're going to bring him on to do another one to talk about what he's doing with us. But when I had told James, so James and I are on Cowtown Warriors together, the Foundation for Vets that you guys have been very much a part of since I started that thing and supported me well through that, is James had been in commercial insurance, right? And he had just transitioned to a new company, Lockton, which is, very well known, very heavy hitter in the insurance world. And so, I had suckered him into going ahead and going through the painful, process of going to do TCU's Executive MBA program, because I said, man, listen, if you really want to understand the world from a 35,000-foot view, you need to understand all the different aspects of it. You don't have to be a subject matter expert in all of them, but know how to ask the right questions. And so, but one of the interesting things that he experienced going through the program, just as I experienced it at the PD, was it wasn't that we were unhappy in our industries, but it was that we weren't happy, right? We were just content. And so as he was nearing the end to get to graduation, and he and I are, naturally close friends, and I've been a mentor for him for a long time, is it really started to uncover that he really wasn't happy where he was. And so he and I were sitting there talking, and he was just really frustrated where he was. But I think a large part of that frustration came from he was causing his own frustration, because I think intrinsically he knew he just wasn't where he was supposed to be. And so one day he calls me and says, "You know what, man, I don't think I'm where I belong." And so he went to his company and said, "Hey guys, I don't belong here," and they were pretty shocked to hear that from him. And because his boss is also a friend of mine. And so his boss and me being naturally, concerned, for James, like, man, what are you going to go do? What is that industry jump going to be? To where the more I started talking to Michael, his president, the more I started thinking, hey, wait a minute, I need to hire this guy. And so Michael Moore, your loss is my gain.
Right.
So, and he's been on this show. Michael's been on this show. Actually, I flew James up to see me in Colorado. I said, hey, man, I'm going to send you a plane ticket since you decided you wanted to, go ahead and stop working, and then brought him up there. And it was funny. So James had called Michael and said, yeah, Spann wants me to come up here and house sit for him so he and his wife can go do a little bit of camping. And Michael told him, said, I think that's more of a recruiting trip than anything else. So we came on, and it has made, even though it's still new that him being on the team, but it's made a large amount of comfort that the communication is so easy because he understands a lot of things. So not many real estate teams, especially that's primarily focused on residential real estate, have everybody's got an undergrad. There's a lawyer, Laura, and 2 MBAs, James and I, right? So that's a unique feature for something that anybody with a pen and paper could go get a license in, right? And so that's what's made our competitive advantage and our differentiator, and it made us incredibly successful to be in the top 1% of producers in real estate. Is But having that ability he's having a lot of light bulb moments because I give him a hard time and I do. And in matter of fact, anytime we have new clients and he introduces himself, hey, I'm the new guy. I'm just trying to learn everything. And my job is to be yelled at by Jeremy. And then it gets around to me and I go, my job is to yell at James. But it's really funny is I harass him because, what he's learning is insurance is, I compare it to like a green egg smoker and a gas grill. Insurance is slow and low, like a brisket. You take your time, man. You're working to get the client. It could take a long time, and you get them to the table that may or may not turn out to be a good brisket or not. Whereas we're like searing a filet mignon, right? It's hot and fast.
The black and blue.
Oh,
version.
Yeah, black and blue. It is hot and fast. Things move incredibly fast. And so I give him a hard time. I'm like, hey, are you being slow and low today? Or are you being hot and fast? Or are you being insurance James? Or are you being real estate James? And man, he's just not like getting up. And of course, I'm being a fellow Marine. I can razz him more. But it's been really interesting to see him have these light bulb moments because as we're going through talking about being the subject matter experts in real estate it's more than just knowing what a house buys and sells for. What are the trends? What are the leading causes of trends like lumber? Lumber is incredibly expensive right now. But can most people tell you why? And it's important to understand the why because when you understand the why, then you can see the trends of when it's going to come down. Yes. So we can properly advise clients, or when supply chains are disrupted, right? To be able to go, hey, this is why this is happening. And so it's really fun to watch him get it very, very quickly because he has this background of what he just learned, out of the program that he's able to deploy. But he also brings that unique perspective because he comes from that insurance industry space. And then now he's learning the real estate space, which is going to make him even more of an asset than I've even ever been for the team.
Yes. Having that framework, especially, being able to speak the same language of the overarching framework that you're trying to get at, and then starting to see it from different angles and adding the value with the knowledge that you have in these different levels of expertise that are coming in differently into that framework, and you understand them. That is, that's what I love, and that is the reason why many teams are more successful because they have they can speak the same language because they've built the same framework.
Oh yeah, and what really makes it valuable to in all that is I was able to talk about the strategic plan of the Spann Group because we would be amiss if we didn't talk about strategy,
for sure,
right? I mean that is your hot spot right there, and it's really interesting is James, of course, being newer and energetic and has all these ideas. As I said, look, man, here's the one thing is I'm never going to turn down a good idea. But you're like me. We're idea junkies. And right now I need you to focus on learning because he will evolve to take over my role, which is the business development and research and development portion of the Spann Group. And so I've told him, I said, here's what I want you to do is there's no bad idea, right? But I want you to write them down because right now I need you to be in absorbing mode. But I want you to have these ideas to write down because I want you to look at them a couple weeks later. And if they still seem like a good idea, then what I want you to do is put it through a Porter's 5 forces, right? To see, is this something we should even entertain? And we'll come back so you can kind of talk to the audience about Porter's. And then if it answers the litmus test of Porter's 5 forces says, yes, this could be a opportunity, then the 5 diamond strategy of how do we deploy this idea and is it within our does it align with the strategy that we have for growing, with the vehicles of it, the staging and pacing and everything else that goes on with that idea. And I said, and once you've gone through those, but I said, a lot of these ideas you're having right now is because you're new and you're energetic, but there's a lot of these ideas that you're going to realize really quickly are already either been done and gone or you're just getting ready to learn what they are. But keep writing them down because there's going to be some ideas that your brain housing group is going to stimulate that could turn into something very valuable.
Yes.
So talk to us about, what it means to be a strategic leader in the strategy portion of the program.
It is kind of incredible because you have to wear so many different hats. And many people that come back to school, they're very successful. They say, I've been an engineer all my life. I've made my way up to, this stage, but I realize I have never learned to think strategically. And so they come into the strategy class with this thirst for understanding that bigger picture. And the hats that you wear, they look very different too, right? So from that visionary, the idea generator, we talk about, people like Elon Musk as one of the greatest visionaries of our time. But to get someone who is really good at generating ideas and having a vision to also being able to execute on that vision through the tactical approach that you have to take once you've developed that strategic plan, those people they're rare. They're rare. So understanding what your capabilities are is very important. But what we do in our classroom is we start with that idea of what is the vision that you want to achieve. And then we say, to your point, let's look, is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity to really put that into play, which requires analysis and analytics and attention to detail and things that aren't necessarily up there, pie in the sky, visionary things. But unless you do those appropriately, effectively, and really ask the right questions, then you're not going to know whether or not you're just going down a path that's going to end up being a dead end. And then figuring out then how to ultimately execute that strategy effectively is an entirely different skill set. So I spend a lot of time saying, let's look at the bigger picture. Let's look at macro environmental concepts. What if you were working in a global economy, this particular business model here might work really effectively in the U.S. Can we just lift it up and set it down in Buenos Aires and have it be effective there? Probably not. So what matters contextually that's going to make a difference? And can you influence that? And if so, how? And then, as you said, light bulbs just go off. People they get that framework, and then they're at least able to start putting pieces together and know when to wear what hat, which to me is kind of the primary responsibility of the strategist, is to know, okay, now I've got to step back or I've got to dig deep.
Because, a good idea without execution is just an idea, right?
It is. You can write about it, but it's not going to give you any money.
And I learned a ton about that, and even have deployed it in how I'm doing things now, even with this larger acquisition that I'm working on. And even with, I've sold a few companies for folks, helped them sell their companies, and being able to create the offering memorandum that I went in there with the intention of ask me a question that hasn't been answered in this OM, right? Is I wanted somebody that by the time they got through 35 pages of this OM with links to financial, whole 9 yards, from the 35,000-foot view down to the street level to what each employee costs, blah, 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 blah. And because the goal of what I wanted was that for example, when Dan bought his company, Dan Verbowski bought Leon's, and he was one of 100 people looking at it, is we were able to quickly get to quick no's, because you're able to get to the end of it and decide, hey, I have all the questions answered. This is just not what I want for whatever reason, or it's not a fit. To get to quick no's and reliable yeses, where from the time we went to market with the company to the time that we were papered up in contract was under 90 days and closed 90 days later. And the reason we were able to close this multi-million-dollar company so quick was because the bank was able to go, you answered every question we have. As a matter of fact, I make a joke with the banker on it. It's still a friend of mine. It was just coincidental that the banker that Dan chose, I was like, yeah, I know Chris Hamilton. And so it was kind of funny. Matter of fact, I saw him. He has a house up in Augusta Springs like I do. And we saw each other last week and we were making jokes of this. He went to send it to the no guy at the bank, and the no guy's job is to say no, right? He's there to mitigate risk. And then Chris had called me and said, my no guy wants to take you out for a drink. And I said, why? And he goes, because in the first time in the history of ever never has he been able to let one go on the first pass because he couldn't say no. He kind of stole his thunder. But that's how I got to that, was just learning to, what are all the questions the bankers are going to ask? What are the questions that the buyer's going to ask, the seller's going to ask, the lions, tigers, bears, whoever are going to ask? And that was very valuable to even also, Dan recently had said, hey, I was going back and looking at the OM, and you had created a couple of different potential avenues of how to scale the business, which had some Porter's Five Forces and had the Five Diamond strategy and so forth. And he goes, it was just really interesting to go back and see how all that was still in there now, 3.5 years later that he's owned the company.
Yes.
And so, talk about just the value that you get out of there. And I'd be amiss if I didn't bring up, like you had mentioned earlier, is that global perspective, right? So, that's a valuable part of the program, is the global learning aspect. And so talk to us through that.
I tell you what, it can be a game changer, a life changer for so many people. Even for people that have worked in the global arena for such a long time. I've heard students say that they had traveled with their company to 30 plus countries and didn't get the same experience as they did when they went with an education lens. And what I would say, what we try to do in our global class is we try to go to countries that people would not necessarily choose to go on vacation, but countries that are going to bring out discomfort because they have different cultures, because they work under different economies, perhaps different governments, and we say, hey, if you are in this place, how would you lead differently? And so for people that even are Fort Worth based in a Fort Worth company with Fort Worth products, they need to have a global mindset, because Fort Worth is global. Whether or not you recognize it, it's global. DFW is one of the hubs of the world. And as you think about even our products coming in, the people that are moving to the area, all of those things interact with one another. And we need to understand that this global environment is different than what perhaps you grew up with, and the school you attended, and the experience that you had as a child. So when I teach the global strategy class, my biggest push is for people to understand that context matters, and understanding other people's perspectives and incorporating them into the decisions that you make with your own business is very important. So we make people uncomfortable. We say, okay, you've got a team. Let's just say randomly, we're going to Morocco, which in fact we did one year. Your team is responsible for a particular industry, and we let them choose the industry. So let's say they choose retail trade. Go to Morocco. When we go to Morocco, you need to meet with 3 different companies and learn about retail from a Moroccan perspective. and develop an opportunity to move into that, into retail in Morocco. So we say, we basically give the parameter of saying you're in a fictional company here in the U.S. that is choosing to move into this global space. And let's just say we have a lot of pivoting going on because people have an assumption about where they think they would be effective in Morocco before they get there. And then once they get there and they speak to the different companies and the businesses and the individuals, they start to recognize there's different. Now that they understand Porter's 5 forces, they understand where there might be opportunity in an industry, and they start to get at that context. Then they say, here we have some resources and capabilities that are going to be, as we call them, overwhelmingly effective in this particular location. And so ultimately the goal of that project is to just pinpoint an opportunity in this country and whether or not they could be successful with it. It allows them the discomfort of saying, wow, I would have never believed that I could make connections with individuals in Morocco, and yet you can. So we challenge them to that. And then, wow, I would have never thought that I could actually effectively start a business in Morocco and be successful in that. And in many cases, in some cases, we have seen the individuals in the program actually move forward with those business connections they've made and start doing business. So it's a practical and theoretical approach to really expanding your comfort zone.
Well, it certainly helped me in business. So we went to Buenos Aires,
Yes.
Argentina, and then we went to Santiago, Chile, and then we went to Lima, Peru. And an interesting thing is, so my undergrad, was political science, international relations with an emphasis on Latin American studies. So when I had gone to TCU, is I had learned about somebody who was the then mayor of Mexico City, named Lopez Obrador. And I remember my foreign policy professors talking about how Lopez Obrador was someone on the radar to be a future president of Mexico, of all of Mexico, and that he really appealed to the people and he was very left-wing and so forth. So understanding the different politics of different countries like, Latin America, and then fast forward going on, the global studies trip that we did of setting up these meetings, learning to communicate, how do you get to the decision makers and so forth. Then fast forward to now there was a presidential race in Mexico where Lopez Obrador was the front runner. And what I had learned in the end of 2018 was that Mexico citizens, especially those of high net worth, were going to make up 35% of international buyers in Texas and California. And so I'm sitting there, and I had a really good friend of mine, Brett Dickinson, out in La Jolla, California, who was dealing with a lot of high net worth Mexican citizens that were deploying money to buy properties. And so I had Brent and I known each other for a long time, and I said, man, because in real estate, I don't just make commissions off of helping people buy and sell real estate, but I get paid a referral fee if I connect a client and an agent anywhere on the planet. But I have taken great pride in making sure I connect people with the right people, not just with a agent, but the best agent, right? Matter of fact, we've been successful at it to a point where we've been number one in Sotheby's 3 years in a row in doing these referrals effectively. Because you can refer all day long, but if the deal doesn't close, then again, it goes back to being just a good idea without execution. It's just an idea. And so that meant that we had to learn about other agents. We had to learn, who was good in their, just because you're the highest producer in your area doesn't mean you're the best producer in your area. And just because you're the best producer in your area might not mean you're a fit for that client. And so we had built this platform of learning, who the agents were. And I had told Brent, I said, man, we need to get down here in Mexico City. But matter of fact, we were so successful at this for 3 years in a row that every year and a half, Sotheby's, which is a global brand, it's in just about every major country there is, they did their global networking event. And this time was on Zoom or a Zoom-like feature because of the pandemic. And they actually featured our team on there where we were speaking to the entire global Sotheby's presence on, hey, the reason we've been number one is because we know how to connect relationships, find the right people. So when Brent and I said, let's get down here, because if Lopez Obrador wins, then I think that is going to pick up the volume of people wanting to get their money out of Mexico to park it here in the U.S. because of their concerns because look, let's face it, no matter where you are in this planet, people spend money based on politics many times, right? Or their lack of, right?
Yes.
And so we hedged that, and we went down there, and the first time we met with all the agents down there, trying to learn to people, but then we started making meetings where we were down there every 60 to 90 days in Mexico City and meeting with wealth managers, accountants, anybody that touched the money, because if somebody's going to move money, they're going to talk to the people that touched their money first. So that way we would be the first point of contact to navigate those referrals wherever they were going. And we were, that was as a matter of fact, we got a great place we stay in Polanco down there called Las Alcobas. This is a plug for Las Alcobas. It's a little boutique hotel, 33 rooms. Oh, it's great. Send a driver, pick us up from the airport and all that. And, but it was really funny as people were like, oh, you're going to Mexico. You better have your head on a swivel. I was like, man, I'm down here in Polanco, and man, it's some of the best restaurants and everything else. Everything's walking distance. I always felt safe there. But it was really interesting because up until the pandemic hit, this became a part of what we do is every 60 to 90 days, we were down there having that presence. So that way we could attract the business. And that way they could get the subject matter experts in going and buying real estate. And, and it did mean a lot to them to go, okay, you're not just some real estate agent. You're someone that's actually educated and then even higher education, and you have this experience and so forth. So that helped me unlock a lot of business that came in. And then, of course, the pandemic comes and shuts things down with all kinds of things like supply chain. So talk to me about that. From your standpoint of seeing just these major supply chain interruptions is – like I think I read a article this morning. Biden is putting together a task force to fix the supply chains, right? And so, which I always find politics, and like everybody knows me, knows that I'm not left, right, center, anything else. Nobody could even guess where I lie on it, but I find politicians funny. Like, I'm president of the world. I can fix this because I said so, or whatever, regardless of what party they're affiliated with. But the supply chain disruption from COVID is a real problem.
Yes. I have to say, as much as, if I could go back in time and erase COVID, I would do it in a heartbeat. But it has been fascinating from an academic standpoint in seeing how some businesses are able to really, really kind of renew their business models in a way that is even more successful today than it was a year and a half ago. And so we get the opportunity to talk about that a lot in class. And of course, supply chain has played a huge role in the ability for companies to either be more successful or in many cases way less successful because of the restrictions, because of the disruptions, because, and as you pointed out, that why these things are happening helps you solve those supply chain issues ultimately. But sometimes it's just a communication thing, right? You have to let your customers know. Normally we would have these items here. Unfortunately, we're in a delay right now. But to know okay, let's talk to all these other potential suppliers that may have some things in their inventory or stocked, and get them in that way. Those are the agile leadership skills. I think supply chain is an interesting concept because when you think about it from a strategic standpoint, a lot of things that we talked about, say, for instance, the auto industry decades ago, we talked about how the Japanese companies became so successful because they became so efficient, and their push was all about efficiency, just-in-time inventory, having the most efficient supply chain possible. And so the U.S. said, well, many of the companies said, let's go and study that so we can do the same thing. And it was an exercise in the way we can have the best profit margin is to bring our expenses down. And the way we do that is to become more efficient. And as you know, we can't survive in this, what we call this VUCA world, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, if all we're focusing on is efficiencies like that, because then we don't have that surplus inventory that we need so much. So we're actually asking businesses to have a different mindset now. You're going to have to develop a new type of supply chain mentality, one that includes the ability to be able to pivot in times of crisis like this.
Yeah. So do you think that because of these disruptions that the just-in-time inventory mentality will be changed? And that also comes with not just efficiency in what you have and how to do things and make things, but also there's a cost of keeping inventory, right? I mean, there's a financial cost to it, where, hey, you don't just get taxed on the income your business generates, you get taxed on, the inventory that you have.
Yes, I do think there's going to be opportunities for creative ways of solving these problems where organizations can look to one another and say, is it possible for us to collectively have a surplus of inventory items so that we can help one another in times of crisis, right? Just like a neighborhood that has a text string that says, hey, do you have a cup of sugar? Because I'm making a pie and I don't want my pie that's not sweet, right? And somebody's willing to hand over that cup of sugar. And happily, because they know the next day they'll be able to borrow vinegar from their neighbor. That same kind of approach, I think, can be taken with issues like this, the collaborative effort that so many businesses, just historically speaking in the U.S. in particular, have not considered because we just have such a competitive mindset.
Yeah, and again, yet another plug for TCU's Executive MBA is understanding the value that I got out of our supply chain portion has helped me create clarity for our clients who are incredibly concerned that a 2008 bubble is upon
imminent.
us, right? And the interesting thing is because most people confuse the term. They go, well, the housing crisis of 2008. And I'm like, it wasn't the housing crisis of 2008. It was the lending crisis of 2008.
Yes.
Is actually going back to 2008, we actually still had a scarcity of houses. Mm-hmm. And being that this lending crisis caused such a disruption, we didn't continue building houses the way we should have. Which actually that supply chain and butterfly effect of what happened in 2008 is one of the main causes to the extreme scarcity of inventory now. Mm-hmm. And then you add in the supply chain disruptions with the, lumber and concrete and resin that's needed to, build PVC and everything is when people go, oh, well, the bubble's going to raise and pop. And I'm like, hey, man, actually, for every day you don't own a house right now, you leave at least $100 on the table because the demand is higher. So the lending, the things that caused the lending crisis, the feds came in and put in barriers to prevent that going forward.
Yes.
And now interest rates are incredibly low, and those barriers are there. So you now you don't just have unqualified buyers, you have qualified buyers. But you have qualified buyers who sat on the sidelines that didn't want to own a residential home prior to the pandemic, that after being locked up in a 750 square foot apartment for 3 months have said, no, I want. So we've added even more demand where we have no supply that is causing us to go up. And people are like, well, I'll just wait till it comes down. I said, well, it's going to tell you what's going to happen is these builders their growth is stunted for the next 2 years, right? I mean, an example of that is a year ago, if you built a 200 square foot deck on your house, your lumber materials would have cost you $900. Today, 12 months later, it costs you $4,000, right? And so there's a cost that people stop building because they can't sell it for what they can build it for, right?
Yes.
And when we're seeing all kinds of crazy things going on in that avenue, builders killing contracts to relist a house for $100,000 more. I posted an article the other day on social media, and of course, the builder's like, well, the clients were a pain in the butt to work with. I was like, really? Well, if that's the case, then I've got a lot of clients that are not a pain in the butt to work with, and this is luckily they retained us, so we've been able to protect them from that, seeing that fine print in there. That's why I always tell folks, like, even if you're going to go buy a new construction, call us, because there's things that, hopefully it's a good process and everything else, but we might just find something in there that's going to protect you down the road, which is, detail Laura with the law degree and everything else, which would bore me to tears to read all that stuff. And, but, looking at folks and saying, even after they work out their supply chain issues, which is going to take another 18 to 24 months, we will be so far behind the building spectrum that we could build 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is going to take us years to catch up with the ability to create inventory where people can buy things. Where I think even in the Fort Worth area, in the next 12 months, it could be potentially unavailable to buy anything under 300, right? And so this benefits the local tax appraisal districts, right? Because they were making 3% on a $100,000 home. Now they're making 3% on a $300,000 home because that's what they're trading for.
Yes.
And so there's all kinds of different effects. And the one thing that I think we've learned on this planet is we go forward, but we never go backward, right? And when people go, well, this housing crisis of 2008, and I'm like, really? It was a housing crisis? I was like, because would you rather buy that same house today or back in 2008? And they're like, well, 2008 because it's worth 4 times as more. And I'm like, yeah, hello, welcome to inflation in real estate. It's only going to keep going up. So the more you just sit on the sidelines, the more you're missing out, right? But being able to explain that and create clarity for our clients who have a better understanding of it changes their mentality towards ownership in real estate. And then, one of the things too is I can go, look, I can create all the clarity, but I'm not here to be in the convincing business. If you're uncomfortable and you don't want to do this, then great. We're just not going to, we're going to be careful of our time. You be careful of your time, and we're going to go on, but we're not here to be in a convincing business. But, and I have people go, well, but if it does pop, I'm going to be out a lot of money. And I'm like, hey, man, I have over $3 million of personal asset, and actually $5 million in personal assets, from homes to investments to everything else. If I'm wrong, I'm in a much worse position than you are, right? And so that it's been good to be able to be able to articulate that to folks, and then bringing James onto the team, who, man, he gets it that quick at that snap and is able to go and explain this to clients. And one of the things that James and I also share, being Marines, is veterans. And I've been it's really warmed my heart, because we had several veterans that naturally came before my class, and we had several in my class, but I felt like a lot of us really came together and really pushed to get more veterans in the program, which can be a blessing or a curse. I fully understand that, right? But if you will, talk to us a little bit about now seeing the influx of veterans coming in and what that has meant to the program.
Yeah, we typically have 25 to 30% of our class are veterans. I think that it adds tremendous value from bringing a perspective that a lot of people that come into our program, again, typically we have in the EMBA program, we have about 70% or above are director level or above positions. So they're working in businesses across multiple functional areas. We have people that are CFOs, CEOs of their own organizations. We have people in the nonprofit space. And, to your point earlier, that we have police officers sometimes. But having that veteran perspective, and typically our veterans have transitioned into a business role of some kind, and they come in with a very different leadership model, but one that is very effective there. And I think the people in the room that have these different perspectives that don't share the military experience, I think to me, I see tremendous value in getting that diverse group of students together. Just the whole, I think a big part of it is cultural. Just the whole ability to understand every veteran that's entered our program understands the importance of culture in being able to really be effective, and they build that culture and help the cohort to really consider the importance of everyone in the room, right? Which is very, very important. Sometimes we'll have typically you get type A personalities in a program of our caliber, and the people that come into the program, their original expectation is, I'm going to be I want to show that I'm the smartest person in the class. I want to get the highest grades. And it doesn't take very long for people to realize, hey, this isn't about me being the smartest person in the class. It's about us as a group learning the most that we can. And I truly believe the veterans see that as a very, very important part of our program.
I know that it is definitely important to me, and being able to take the program helped me translate skills I had learned in the military and in being a first responder into the business world that have made me incredibly effective. Mm-hmm. And so being able to make that transition through that has been very, very, very helpful. Lifelong learning, right? Yes. I know that's a passion point for you. I mean, talk to us about that.
Well, Jeremy, I think, it's interesting being in the role that I'm in as executive director of our program, because we speak to a lot of people who have interest in going back to school, but there's always an excuse not to go. The excuse is typically, hey, I'm already successful at what I do. Why would I want to go back to school and put myself through that? Or this isn't a good time. Or, my kids are, they take up my time, or work is so busy, or all of those things. And then when they finally ultimately say, okay, I'm just going to bite the bullet and come back, there has not been a single soul that I have met who hasn't said, I wish I had done it earlier. Mm-hmm. And so once they get back in the classroom, they say, this lifelong learning stuff is the best that I could ever imagine. Because if you think about how you learned and what was important to you as an undergrad when you were 20 years old, compared to what you can know and learn in the classroom 20 years later as a 40-year-old or 40 years later as a 60-year-old, it's like night and day, because the older you get, the more you recognize the less you know. And so just really just saying, okay, enough's enough, I'm going to leave the rat race of life and do what matters to me, which is to learn more. Going back to school then becomes something that permeates that individual. I mean, the people that leave our program, their biggest thing is that they say that, being gone from the program is they have withdrawal almost immediately. They say that being in that learning environment is so important. So we do have lifelong learning for our alum. We have them get back together in the classroom for advanced negotiations and advanced business law, and people do come back to the classroom and they continue to network with their cohort and with other alumni in the program. And it's not just about, what'd you think of the football game? It's about how can we learn from one another? So that lifelong learning becomes so incredibly clear once people make the commitment to go back to school. I believe, so much in it, and love to see it in our students, in our alumni.
So go back to 20-year-old self, right? Because I know we would all listen, right, at
Yes.
20. But if you knew that 20-year-old self would listen to just one thing you had to tell 20-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what would you tell 20-year-old self?
I would. This is tough because 20-year-old self probably wasn't physically capable of understanding mentally what I would tell myself. But it would be, number one, the world is not black and white. There is lots and lots of gray. And it's very difficult to tell someone who's an accountant that there's a lot of gray in the world. So going through college, that's a tough sell. But saying that those critical thinking skills and knowing what matters to deciding what is the correct decision, or perhaps maybe not the next best, or the worst decision you can make here, that there's a lot of gray in between. I think that's one thing I would say. Give yourself the ability to recognize that it's not just a yes and no or a right and wrong. There's lots of space in between. But the other thing I'd say that I think that an 18-year-old really has a difficult time understanding is the implications of your actions matter in ways that you probably don't know and won't recognize for years. So it's funny, Jeremy, because I told you at the beginning of this podcast that I teach the fellow students, the undergrads, strategy, and then of course I also teach the executives. Well, the students that are undergrads have a very difficult time understanding strategy, because strategy is all about making connections. So just like an 18-year-old might not understand the implication of, jumping off a cliff into dark water at midnight in some area that's 5 miles away from the nearest hospital. They don't understand what might happen in that event, and somebody else might just jump in right after them. By the time they hit about 25, they start to make those the brain actually starts to make those connections and say, there's something that you might want to consider, that this decision might impact the ability for, the helicopter to come save you if you've hit a rock. And so just the ability to make connections, big picture connections, making those at a younger age would have been phenomenal.
Sound advice that we all wish we would have listened to when we were younger. So people want to learn more about TCU's Executive MBA. They want to learn more about you. How do they connect? Yeah. LinkedIn, email, website? What's the best way?
Well, you know it. We've got lots and lots of information on our website, and all you have to do is do a search for TCU EMBA, and it'll show up, and you can just click right on, and there's lots of video testimonials. There's information on our class curriculum, our faculty, our alumni advisory board. Jeremy happens to sit on our EMBA alumni advisory board, and and also the executive coaching experience that we give our students. All of those things are there on the website. I, of course, would be happy to speak with anyone. And if you want to email me directly, s.carter@tcu.edu. I'm happy to speak with anyone who's interested in knowing more about our program.
And in case you missed any of that and didn't have the pen to write it down fast enough, you can always go to www.myexperiencedrealtor.com. That's experience with an ED. Click on podcasts. Go down to Suzanne Carter and click the read more. You'll find the connections there. And of course, as always, if you need to find a trusted professional, no matter where you're going to buy and sell real estate on the planet, go to our homepage where you click on the Find a Trusted Professional link, and we will get you connected. Thank you for coming, Suzanne. Appreciate your time.
It was great, Jeremy. Thank you.